Hi, I'm Dr. Courtney Harris,
And I'm Crystal Harris.
and this is the next edition of the Never Quit Marriage Series edition. Today we'll be talking about assumptions and how dangerous they can be within the relationship.
Yes. He looked at me because I was just guilty of that maybe, 10 minutes ago.
We are just really excited about just sharing our experiences with hopes that they're going to encourage others. And we have been blessed to be able to share on numerous occasions things that we've gone through, and both the triumphs and the losses of those individual battles along the way. And we've lived through them to be able to share with others. And I'm very grateful to God that we have been able to sustain our marriage through those difficult times. And we've just sort of refocused and just purpose that, you know what, everything that we go through is for a purpose. And we're going to endure it as best as we can during that time. Because during the moment, the heat of the battle, it seems really intense. But we sort of told ourselves when everything is going well that, you know what, everything's not always going to go well, but we're going to purpose that, you know what, number one, that we love each other, and we're going to work through it even if it's difficult. Because we realize that difficulties are only but for a moment. You know, the joys don't last 100% of the time, and we realize that. So with that constant in our mind, we have been able to push through things, and a lot of times, more often, as we continue to grow together, we're able to just look past those things and say, you know what, that's going to be potentially rocky. So let's just recognize it is what it is, and we've been able to, I guess, those things that could potentially be destructive, we've sort of just weathered right through those and been pretty good during it. And when that season has ended, we're like, man, you know, it could have been a lot worse, but our approach to it has been pretty good.
Yeah. So, I mean, each marriage is going to have those highs and those lows and those in-betweens. Every single day is not going to always be super happy and joyous and there's no issues, which is what I always wanted to be. But the reality is we're two different individuals and we have to function together. So we have to make it work as best as possible.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's great. We're two different individuals, but we are bound as one within this covenant. So those two different individual approaches and visions about different things come together as one for the common good. And I think that's what is important to have success. If you're trying to live in your marriage with two total different approaches and there's never a common meeting, mm-hmm. then you're probably experiencing a lot of stress and frustration. Mm-hmm. There has to be some compromise. There has to be some willingness to see something how the other person views it.
Yeah.
You can't make the assumption that, you know, your way is right and their way is not right. You can't assume that, you know what, you have the best answer for everything. That might be the best answer for you as an individual, but for you two as the unit, that might not be the best answer. You have to be willing to hear the other person. Again, a lot of what we're talking about in these series and these different topics that we're bringing up, a lot of it is centered around communication, listening, hearing, understanding. If you don't have a full scope of whatever you're going through at that time, then it's going to be hard for you to really put in any valid input because you don't understand the situation.
Yeah, and I think what's important for us to be able to have that happy median or be able to hear each other's perspective is our viewpoint of one another. I remember when mine was not the best of my husband. I remember hearing a joke and they were talking about, you ever see your wife staring at you and just frowning at you? That's because what they're thinking of you is not the best. So I think when we change our perspective of our mates, then we can be able to hear the positive that's coming from them. So for
and,
me,
and appreciate maybe why they have a negative perspective too.
yeah. So why they have a negative perspective?
Yeah. So like what I mean is, if you can appreciate like the positive, that would maybe help you understand the negative that they may be bringing, so that you can say, oh, I can see why you feel that way, versus, oh, you just negative all the time. You know what I mean?
So you mean like talking through why your perspective is the way that it is, why they have a negative perspective of individuals. I mean, yeah, a lot of the negativity or the negative perspective that we have of our mates come from our actions in the past, but a lot of it is just centered on how we want things to be, and I don't know, our ideologies of how marriage should be or how your husband should be. Those kind of things give us that perspective and that negative perspective of that individual as well, because we're expecting so much from them and also the past actions. So it's kind of like an imbalance. A lot of it is just coming internally from us and our thought process and how we're thinking of them throughout the day, so a lot of it is that. But when we're thinking more positive of our mates, we don't necessarily always hear they don't know what they're talking about. When they're talking about something, we don't receive it in a negative way, like, it's you, so you don't know what you're talking about. So if we think more positive of our mates, then we can see the outcome a little differently from the things that they're saying.
And that takes, that's good. That takes time, because again, as she mentioned earlier, you have yes, you are two individuals, but again, you're one in that marriage union, that covenant that God has ordained for man and woman. So in terms of being able to have that positive perspective and outlook about your spouse will take time, because you have to get over that individuality that, again, two different backgrounds coming together saying you love each other, want to have a family, all that, that's great. But you have to be able to get over that, I live my life this way, you live your life that way, for the common good of the marriage. But like I said, that takes time for you to be able to see something positive about your spouse. We all come in eyes like deers in headlights, in that, we love how they look, we love that they take care of them, their appearance, all that good stuff. But, that lovey-dovey puppy love in the beginning wears off when you in the trenches of taking care of family and taking care of financial things, obligations, home, work, stresses, all that kind of stuff really is piled upon that love that you had that puppy love in the beginning, and now you're in the real life of things. So I would encourage you to sort of get back to those things that you really loved about your spouse, because they haven't went away. It's just that life has sort of piled all this stuff on, and you really can't see that. You're looking at, oh man, how they handle family life, how they process, stresses from work, and they bring that stuff home, and now you have to deal with that on top of dealing with your own work stress and community stress and dealing with finances. Yeah, those good traits are still there. You have to be able to push past all of that stuff, because what we're talking about in this Never Quit Marriage series is never quitting on your spouse. So that means that when your husband brings home stress because his boss is really riding him for not meeting a deadline, or maybe he totally messed something up at work, you can't be like, man, you know what? You need to do a better job at work. No, that may be true, or that may not be true. But you have to be able, like I was saying, you have to be able to filter through all of that stuff and say, you know what, babe, I know it's tough, but you know what? You really are a creative person. You're really a hard worker. I want to encourage you to keep doing your best. That's how you really build up the marriage to the point where, you get to that point where it doesn't matter what comes. You guys are glued together. Those things may come to hit you. You know what? You might not, because of that error that your husband may have made or your wife may have made at work. Because of that error, they might miss that promotion. But the spouse who is not in that situation has to be able to come up to the other spouse and say, you know what? We didn't get it this time, but you know what? God will provide. I still love you. You are still an asset to that company that you work with. Not, man, how could you do that? We really needed the money. You really messed up things, or because we are a PG family, I'm sure there's some other explicatives that's going to go forth in that private time at home, some curse words that would go forth in that conversation. That, unfortunately, if you pour fire on a situation that is already bad, that spouse is going to be replaying that stuff. Man, I messed up, and now, man, I just really messed up the home life, and we needed this, and I'm just no good. The power in words.
Yes.
That in the last video we talked about you really not putting other distractions above your relationship. Why? Because at the end of the day, if in this case your spouse doesn't get that promotion, you guys needed the money, you're still married at the end of the day.
Yeah, and another point that I don't know if Courtney may be a little sensitive to me saying is that, we are the females and we're supposed to be the softer mate, and the more you need to be more gentle with me, and you definitely have to be more gentle with me. But also at the same time, just because they're men doesn't mean that they don't get affected by the words that we say. Like, sometimes I say they're gentle giants, or they have this hard exterior, but internally they're very sensitive. So women, our words have so much power. We can either tear down our man or we can build him up. So we really have to watch what we say. Those situations come where it's really hard and you really think like, oh my goodness, we could have been in a different place or a different position if this didn't happen. But we really need to learn from those things. Like when they made a mistake that you may not think that they should have done, we can learn to build them up in a different way versus tearing them down. It's a way to put across your point than just with negativity.
And our scripture for today is Colossians 3:23. And whatsoever you do as unto the Lord. Do it heartily as unto the Lord and not unto men. So in this, we're talking about making assumptions. As my wife just pointed out, yes, both men and women have emotions, and they, you may be able to seemingly have those things bounce off. Yeah, but it's easier, from my opinion, from my experience, that, things on the outside bounce off me like no problem. But the things that my wife brings to the table really stick with me because I love her and I'm with her every day of my life. And even when I'm not with her, she's on my mind. So those conversations that we have stay with me.
My words impact you a lot more than just, the comments of negativity from the job or from your employees. And it should be that way. The words of my wife have more weight than anybody outside, because I know this is my safe place. Again, if the job goes away, we're still together. So what the input that she brings is more valuable than anyone else on the outside. So as it relates to our topic of assumptions, I want to be clear about my intentions with my wife, and not just my actions, but also my words. And I want the same from her. And I want to encourage that for you as well, because you want to know where your spouse is in terms of how they think about you. What do they want from you? What expectations may they have from you? And those are all expectations. Now that's something important.
That's another topic. But those are all good things, because we don't want to assume that we know what they're thinking, because you could be on two totally different playing fields, and then what you were assuming about them is not so. Then that's another ball of trouble that you would have to deal with. So we're encouraging you not to make those type of assumptions about your spouse, because it could
you can avoid arguments as well.
You can avoid so much.
Like the example, I guess Will could just go ahead and just tell you guys what happened earlier. He was like, "What are you cooking today?" And I'm like, "You didn't bring food for me to cook." Well, at first I just said, "You didn't bring food." And
so I assumed she was assuming that I was bringing something already prepared that we didn't have to cook, based upon the way that she said it.
And I'm thinking he stopped at the grocery store and bought something for me to prepare just for this tonight.
Right. So
it could have been an argument, but it didn't. It was just like, okay, we both made some big assumptions right there.
So we just talked it through right there, and then that squashed it, and that's it, and we were able to move on. But we know that in times past that wasn't always the case. That little fire right there, we just blew it out. Where before it turned into a big wildfire, and it lasted a day, 2-3 days over
and then
something.
You start talking about stuff that happened 2-3-4 months ago.
Right. When you make those assumptions, it opens the door, if you don't handle them, for other stuff that you didn't handle before or discuss or communicate. So it's important to just handle those difficulties as soon as possible, so that they don't become fire for other things.
And communication is key also when it comes to assumption. Like my biggest thing was in past in our relationship, I always said, well, I don't want to assume, but it's like I didn't even think it all. It was just like, I'm not going to make any kind of assumptions, so I'm just going to leave you to tell me specifically. Now you got to have a balance of in between that as well. You have to still be able to know some things that need to be done versus, just, I don't know exactly what it is you want, so I'm not going to do anything, So it's just like, just your assumptions, you just have to have a balance in between. You can still think about things and maybe what your spouse and mate may need, but then don't just over assume that they already have everything taken care of in certain areas.
Right. That just shows a little bit more intentional thought on your behalf, but also, as you grow more with your spouse, you don't need to make so many assumptions, because you learn what they like, so you know those things. But if there's any question, please just communicate. That's the best policy. If you don't know, ask. We want to encourage you again to always seek the Lord, always be prayerful, be praying for your spouse, be praying for your family. You can never pray enough for your family. You can never pray enough for your spouse, your wife, and the things that, or your husband, or whatever is on their plate. Because we want to encourage you to find the good in your spouse for your relationship.
And just like when Courtney said earlier that our perspectives, it takes time to get a positive perspective. But as he said earlier with the Never Quit workshop, what we want you to do is work on your marriage. It's also a work that you have to do to make your mind think positively about your spouse. So when those negative thoughts come, then you have to combat it with something positive about them. And then your perspective will change.
And if you're struggling with that, I would encourage you to make that your number one prayer item. Lord, help me think positive about my spouse. Help me see the good in them.
And not always just the negative, because we can focus so much on the negative.
I've been Dr. Courtney Harris.
And I'm Crystal Harris.
And we are encouraging you to
never quit.